Hello and welcome back to A Moment with TSI, the podcast created for you to get the language immersion you need to improve your skills. I'm Carlos, your host, and this is a very special episode because we're moving from audio to a video podcast. In this episode, I'm going to bring you my own story, how I got the language immersion experience I needed to learn the language. But before we get into the details of this episode, let me invite you, whether you are on Spotify or Apple Podcast, to like and rate our podcast. And of course, if you're watching this episode on YouTube, you can like, subscribe, and hit the bell button. Now, the first thing I want to mention about my language experience is that my parents, and I mean my father and my mother, were always interested in my learning process. So, yes, thank you very much, mom and dad. Now, before I tell you how they got interested that I learned the language, I have to start by telling you that my childhood was very eventful, meaning a lot happened, a lot of things occurred, and especially when it comes to my health, because I was an asthmatic boy. Unfortunately, I couldn't go out as many of my friends all the time because if I got out, I could get the allergy that would trigger or would start my asthma problem. Therefore, I had to find ways to get entertainment at home, and my father was the one that helped me with this. I started playing video games, so yes, gaming was a very important part of my learning process. Imagine this. I am playing a video game and I want to pass it to complete the video game, right? So what happens if you don't understand the language, in this case, English, of the video game? Of course, game over. You are not going to complete the the game, or you're not going to be able to progress or advance as you want. Therefore, because I wanted to complete and pass my video games, I wanted to understand, and I decided to learn the language on my own. I started learning through that process. Of course, the next step is speaking about something my parents were always looking for me. They were always looking for me to go to summer camps or any other similar activity where I would be exposed to the language. So, yes, summer camps were fun times, but also a learning time. Okay? Summer camps helped me a lot with my learning process because while I was having fun, I was learning even if I didn't know. Next, we have to talk about music. Yes, music was very important in my language immersion experience. Why? Because most of the music I like is sung in English, and also because I wanted to learn how to play the guitar. And most of the resources were found in the English language. So, yes, I learned to play the guitar and also I learned to speak the language, or at least some more vocabulary that would help me to improve my skills. And there you have it. You can see, if you are on YouTube, you can see my guitar over there. Now, when you are listening to music and you want to use it for your learning process, you need to do what is called conscious listening, meaning that it's not only enjoying the music, but paying attention to the words being pronounced, how they are pronounced, and trying, if possible, to read the lyrics, meaning what the person is singing, so you can visualize the words and match to the sounds. And speaking about visualizing and matching the sounds, we can now move to movies. Yes, movies also helped me a lot, especially because I would always watch movies in the original language. Okay? There's no point on watching movies to learn English if you are watching them in Spanish, French, or any other language, of course. Uh, a lot of people ask me about whether to use captions or subtitles when watching the movies. And I always say the best idea is that you expose or you fully expose to the language. In this case, I recommend English captions or English subtitles. This way, you are visualizing the words that you're listening, and if you really want to learn, do conscious listening. You can also pause, read the word, repeat what you heard, and you will also be practicing your pronunciation while learning your vocabulary and improving your listening skills. Now, something that is very important for me to mention and something that had a big impact in my language immersion experience as I was learning from a small boy, or since I was a small boy, to becoming a teacher, was having very, very good friends that were always exposed, or at least most of the time, exposed to the language too. And I want to start by mentioning my childhood friend was also a classmate whose mom is from Canada. His name is Christopher, and since I spent a lot of time with him at his house, I would be exposed to English every time his mom was speaking to him in the language. So thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you very much, Christopher. You helped me a lot with my English. Now, another friend was my dear neighbor, my brother, Clive, because his family also spoke the language and they were speaking the language most of the time at his house. I would be exposed to the language and I would learn a lot with them because I also had to speak English from time to time to their mom. So thank you very much, family. I really, really appreciate how much you helped me with the language. By the way, I have to mention that my dear brother Clive is also an English teacher. If you are in Panama, I recommend you speak to him. And you can find him in Instagram as Clive's English Corner. I'm going to leave some links in the description of this episode. Now, moving forward, the next step was getting a mentor. So, yes, you can create your own language immersion for yourself at home in your activities like going to school, going to summer camps, etc. But you always need someone to guide you through your learning process. Now, in this case, I must mention dear teacher Lilia. She was my teacher, but also my mentor, and thanks to her, I transitioned from being an ESL learner to becoming a teacher of English as a second language, which is TESL. Now, teacher Lilia helped me a lot at her academy called CVI in Venezuela, my hometown, Barquisimeto. So I also want to shout out to her. She's now living in Mexico and she has an academy there. So if you are in Mexico, I recommend you to speak to her because you're going to learn a lot. Okay. Also, she's giving online classes. So if you want to take online classes with her, be my guest. I'm going to leave some links in the description too, so you can visit her website and get in contact to her. Again, thank you very much, teacher Lilia. Now, after being a teacher for a long time, I realized there was a lack of information for Spanish speakers who wanted to get started in learning English. I also noticed that for beginners, very beginners who were actually trying to start, that first step was very difficult because they felt frustrated for not understanding any explanation or any help that they might get. This is why I decided to create TSI, or in Spanish, Todo sobre Inglés, which is the blog that is the companion to this podcast, and I always share some information in Spanish for Spanish speakers over there. If you are a Spanish speaker looking for extra help to get started, I invite you to visit our blog. I'm going to link to that in the description too. So, basically, this is how I got my language immersion experience along the years since I was a young boy until now. I still use some of these tips that I'm giving you here for my own language learning process, since right now I am trying to learn French. If you feel any of these activities that I mentioned here can help you, of course, they are recommended and you should try, especially getting the language exposure as you are doing right now with this podcast. Well, this is it for today. Thank you very much for listening. Remember that you can go and subscribe to the blog, but also leave a rating and like this episode or this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or any of the platforms that are available. And once more, if you are watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, and hit the bell button. Thank you very much again, and until the next one.